G'day everyone, it's James Davis from the Pax8 Academy again, and this time I've got James from Gander Service Management. How you doing, James?
I'm good, thank you, James. How's life with you?
It's a busy start to the year, no doubt impacting you as well.
Yep, it's all
I
good.
hear a bit of an accent. Where are you located?
I'm located in Auckland, New Zealand, originally from the UK. Been over here for about 16 years now.
Nice. Well, it's always good to get different people from around the world to share their perspectives, and I think you'll bring an interesting one from what you do, and we're going to talk a lot around the internal IT teams and how they operate and how we need to work together and collaborate better with them as a team to get better results for organisations. I thought I'll ask you an easy one. What do you see out there in the industry? How well do internal IT teams and outsourced IT work together?
I'm going to sound like a real consultant now. It depends. I have seen some organisations work really well with managed service providers when they both treat it as a partnership. It's not just a supplier-customer relationship. But I have seen some work really badly where I don't want to say whether it's one party or the other's fault, because generally it comes down to a bit of both. But I've seen it not work where the customer makes some wild assumptions about what the service provider is going to bring, but they've never actually voiced those assumptions, especially not during the initial negotiations. And where the service provider maybe thinks this customer doesn't really know what they're looking for, so we can sit back and bill them for doing very little. And both of those approaches don't work. The ones that really work are where it's a partnership and the service provider sometimes needs to guide the customer into what they should be doing to get a better service.
And I
Does
suppose
that make
there's
sense?
a lot of it makes complete sense. I think that I'm assuming the majority sit there somewhere in the middle on that
Yeah.
spectrum on success.
Yeah.
So curious from that, the companies that do have internal IT, why do they typically have them?
Why do they have IT or why do they have service providers?
Yeah, why do they have the internal IT team?
Sometimes it's just historical, and the CIO has had bad experiences of outsourcing previously. Sometimes it's because they've got people in-house who understand the business. So it's not just about knowing the tech, it's about knowing your business, knowing the people. I used to work for a system integrator. I've contracted in managed service providers as operations managers. So I've worked on both sides. But things like service desk, I think, personally, are teams that should remain in-house because you've got that understanding with your user base. They know what's going on, how people are using things, what's important, what isn't important, the language that is being used. And while I have seen it work really well with some service providers delivering service desks, they tend to be the smaller service providers who can really focus on the customer and get to know them as if they are part of the department. And sometimes I suppose it's just easier. If you've already got people in-house, you don't need to put an awful lot of thought into keeping them there and maintaining the status quo. As long as things are working, a lot of CIOs or IT managers just don't want the hassle of thinking about, should I get somebody else in to run this for us or deliver this for us? How do I know I'm getting the right people? It's a lot of work. And when it's done well, it's really worthwhile. But when it's not, it just creates a lot more headaches for those senior managers.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I'm very curious from an outsider's perspective of what are the CIO and IT managers? What are they actually responsible for in the typical organisations that hire these kinds of people?
Well, again, it sort of depends on the organisation. You'll have seen, just as I have, some organisations advertising for an IT manager, and really it's just a senior sysadmin where it's hands-on doing the work. But a lot of the organisations are wanting somebody who can look at the strategic direction from a technology point of view for the organisation. So does it align with what the organisation is trying to achieve? Giving input at the C level to what technologies are out there that can enable the business to move forward. And then just being accountable for the delivery of that IT service and making sure that nothing really creates a hassle. You can't remove accountability whether you've outsourced it or keep it in-house. But knowing where you're heading, what you're trying to deliver, that you're delivering the right things at the right time, all those kind of things really. The same as any of us are trying to do, but just sometimes on a larger scale.
From your experience, what does the sort of market look like for talent with CIOs and IT manager type roles? Are there enough to fill the positions?
I would say there are enough to fill the positions within New Zealand anyway. I can't speak about anywhere else within the APAC region. Are there enough good ones to fill the positions? Possibly not. I think, again, within New Zealand, we've got a number of CIOs who have only worked in the one place or the one sector for a number of years, and they haven't necessarily looked at what else can be done. Conversely, you also get people who've worked in the same organisation or the same sector for a number of years, and they're just jumping around from, oh, this technology seems cool and trendy, we should head down that route. And then 2 years later, yeah, well, we'll forget about that and we'll head off down this direction there. From what I've seen are good are those who have a wide range of sectors and organisations, a wide range of sizes of organisations, so they can tailor their thinking to what the organisation is looking for. And from what I've seen, there probably aren't enough of those. We need to start bringing more people up from different areas within the technology teams into those senior management roles, and make sure it's not just those who've done architecture or those who've been project managers. You need CIOs or IT managers of a variety of skill sets or ways of thinking, I believe anyway.
Well, it makes sense. It's very limited, like what you just described there. The ones that are good to great sound like they probably have more grey hairs, have been around for quite a while. They know what they're doing. And it's probably much like the rest of the technology area. We've got sort of a generational gap that isn't going to immediately fill them.
No, I mean, I have seen some exceptionally good CIOs or senior IT managers in smaller organisations who've been given the opportunity to grow up into that, and they're in their 40s, they've got the right thinking, and they're cutting their teeth in an organisation the size and capability of which they are able to cope. They wouldn't be good enough to move into larger organisations yet. But you learn by moving up in an organisation the size of which suits your skills, and then you move beyond that. So it's getting there, but I just don't think we've got enough good ones at the moment.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And that sounds like there's an opportunity for the right outsourced partner to fill those gaps as well. But you mentioned, I'll play on the negatives for a bit, where you started off this conversation. You mentioned where things go wrong is when there's sort of a lack of clarity on what everyone's providing. Yeah. Where does that typically come from, and who's responsible for fixing that, do you think?
It comes from two places. Sometimes you've got the customer who's seeking an outsourced partner or service provider, and they've never really done it before, or they've never really worked with a service provider before. And so they have an expectation that it will work the same as if you've got an internal team. You can rely on a lot of goodwill. You can rely on people interpreting your vague comments in such a way that it will just get delivered. And you can't do that because even the best service providers in the world, they are companies, they're businesses. They're there to make a money. That's grammar. They're there to make a profit and make money. So you quite rightly sit down with your potential customer and you understand what it is they're after, and you deliver what they've asked for. And there may be a little bit of give and take, where there's a bit of roughness on the edges, but it depends how well the customer is treating the service provider as to how well the service provider will treat the customer. If it works both ways, then the service provider is quite rightly going to say, hey, look, that's not strictly in the contract, but I don't mind us helping out here, and we won't charge you any extra for that because it's just an extra little bit of work. Just like, so the customer should be able to say, yeah, I know we haven't been doing what we said we would be doing. We'll work on sorting all that out. So we'll do a bit extra just to get the relationship back on track. It's got to be a bit of give and take. Where I think service providers can help out with that approach is being the bigger partner in the relationship. So when you recognize that your customer doesn't really understand what they're doing, sitting them down and saying, hey, look, the contract we've signed is very good for us because we can charge you for everything outside of this small bubble at a time and materials basis, which is twice the price of what we would normally charge for a managed service. But this is what I think we can do together to help this be more successful for both parties. I have worked with service providers who have sat back when they've realised that the customer doesn't really know how to hold them to account, and so they do the bare minimum. And then I've gone in as a contract ops manager and pulled them up, and they've gone, well, now you're asking us about it. Yeah, we'll do it properly, but nobody seemed to care before, so why would we? We're just clipping the ticket and making the money. That's no good for a long-term relationship. As soon as you get caught out, you're on a hiding to nothing. So being a good service provider, I think, means helping out those customers who are struggling to understand what they should be doing and helping them to get things sorted. I've probably gone slightly off topic from the question there.
Well, it was perfect. It's perfect advice for the partners, is to be the professionals in the relationship, lead them through. I think that's a perfect advice for this. And as you're talking through that, what sort of the question that sprung to my mind out of curiosity is, how often are you seeing those sort of IT managers, CIOs wanting it to be a partnership compared to maybe they're trying to manage their own fiefdom for selfish needs, or that's what the organization is directing, and there's not this ability to make that partnership?
More often than not, I see that there is a desire for it to be a partnership. That lack of desire tends to disappear if the reality or the perception by the CIO or IT manager is that the service provider is not pulling their weight, not making it a two-way partnership. Then it starts reverting back to customer and supplier relationship, and the word contract comes up in regular monthly or quarterly meetings. And everybody watching this or listening to this will know that as soon as the word contract is brought up in conversation, then there's an awful lot of hard work to be done to get that word out of the conversation again, because trust has been lost. But I think generally, from what I've seen, most CIO/IT managers want a partnership. They may not necessarily realise it to start with, but they see the value in a partnership and they want to maintain that.
Do you think enough of them understand how to initiate that partnership stuff from their side to trigger the
No.
service provider?
No, because I think there are plenty out there who do know, but where they don't, it's either because they've never seen what a good partnership looks like, so they're just running with memory of how it was before, or they don't know how to have those conversations. They think that here are my requirements is enough. And maybe it should be enough, because a good service provider should be able to say, okay, well, we understand what your requirements are for this relationship. This is what I think we can do on top of that to still enable you to have your requirements met. But, and don't say this part out loud, but to build on it so that we can get more business out of you. Because a good partnership is going to mean that the CIO or IT manager is always open to exploring what else can we give you. That may be just a bit of a body shop. Hey, look, I've got 3 people off sick at the moment. Have you got anybody who can help out? Because I trust you. To our DBAs retiring next year, can you take on that functionality as well? We're taking on this new product and we don't have the skills in-house. Are you able to look after that for us? Because once you've got that partnership relationship, the trust is built up, and the CIO or IT manager is going to be more open to giving you more business. But it's got to rely on the service provider to come to the party and say, hey, look, yep, we can completely do that, and here's all the extra value add that we'll do. And you build that into the price, but you make sure they understand that it is adding additional value. Because I come from the service management background, and everything that we do is about value to the customer. It's not about just doing it.
Very much so, and I think that that perspective that you just provided us, it's a very different engagement than, say, when a CFO or COO is coming to you and going, we don't have anyone, we want to fully outsource it, educate it. You've often got a much more technical person sitting there, and that's probably where I see a lot of that sort of friction start, because what you just said around a lot of the CIOs, IT managers don't know how to engage with a service provider, so they lay out the requirements like they would look at it, not how a commercialized operation will look at it. That's often where the friction immediately starts from that.
Yeah, but there's an awful lot of wiggle room there for a service provider to do the bare minimum and charge top whack, unless the CFO or the COO knows what they should be looking for. So again, that's where the service providers should be pulling on the grown-up pants and saying, well, you've said you want all this, but do you realise that means X, Y, and Z? And by the way, you haven't thought about this. That wasn't included. Because yes, you can then come back to the party and say, yeah, well, you didn't mention that in the contract that we drew up and you signed off on. So that's going to cost you more. By all means, have those sections of the contract, but do also go back to them and say, do you want to include this part in there as well? Because you haven't mentioned that, and experience has taught us you're probably going to need that.
What should a good IT manager, CIO, be holding the service providers to account with? Like, we're talking the partnership, there's give and take.
Yeah.
What does that sort of good partnership look like with that internal accountability?
Regular communication is key. So don't just wait for the monthly meetings or the quarterly meetings with the account manager. Have those regular touch points. Include them in the work that's being done internally, if it is a hybrid model of internal and external. So if there's project prioritization meetings or governance meetings, get the service provider involved. If there's regular stand-ups or weekly team meetings or whatever it is that the organisation calls it, get the service provider included in those, because the service provider world has so much more experience and knowledge than many internal IT departments. Not all. So when the conversations come around of we've seen this happening, the service provider should be able to go, hey, we've seen something similar with another customer. We came up with an approach. So let's sit down and work out how we can include that with you. Or when it comes to prioritization and governance, you say you want to do this, but are you aware there's also this other work that you probably should be doing first to enable that to be done more effectively? Here's a statement of work that enables us to do it for you quickly so that you don't have to delay the project by more than a reasonable length of time. So the customer has to include the service providers in all conversations. Again, it's a partnership. They should be seen as part of the IT department, not just an add-on. And if you're not being included, then knock on the door and say, hey, we'd like to get one of our senior techs to come along to these meetings. Is that okay?
What happens to the service provider if they're not being let in that way from the CIO, IT manager perspective? They've got the walls up, they're not willing to do it as a partnership. What do you think the service provider should look at doing?
Well, there's only so far you can go with constantly knocking on the door saying, hey, we want to be your partner. But I think little tiny things, where you can maybe go along to that monthly or quarterly meeting and say, we've identified all these recurring problems. It may not be within the scope of the engagement we've got, but we think you should look at prioritizing these because we can see how much extra work is being done by everybody to work around these. And I honestly believe that even the most cold-hearted IT manager or CIO is going to start going, oh, yeah, okay, they're coming to us with good ideas, and they're not even saying they will do it. They're just saying, we think you should look at these things. And then people start thawing, maybe, or the walls get lowered in places so that you can then start being involved a little bit more. So just those little value add things that don't take much effort on your part as a service provider, but can look huge to the customer if they're not already aware of it. Because the majority of internal IT departments aren't doing things like problem management very well. They're not doing good governance of work and prioritizing work based on value. They're just reacting to what the wider organization is shouting loudly about. So being able to say, with that benefit of a little bit of distance, are you aware of these things? Or while one of our guys was helping out on this piece of work, he noticed X. So you should probably be aware of that and get one of your team to look into it. We're happy to help if you need it, and eventually they're going to go, well, we haven't got time for that. So that's when the conversation is, well, look, here's a statement of work we could help you with if you're interested. Or we could do an amendment to the contract to say we'll also include X number of days of this type of work so we can just pick it up and do it without the need for a new purchase order.
It's interesting to hear that because a lot of the time, from my experience in talking to a lot of the service providers, there are walls up, and you've highlighted the need for us to approach it differently, and that makes a whole lot of sense because service providers are coming from a different place to IT managers and CIOs. I often hear a lot of service providers talking about they are trying to partner, and they're giving these sort of recommendations to the CIO and IT manager. And as soon as they're gone, the CEO, COO is coming to them and going, why hasn't all of these things done? Why haven't you been telling us about these things? But they've been passing that sort of information on, and there hasn't been this closed loop. So where do you see that sort of responsibility from a service provider? Is it fully with just the relationship with the internal tech team, or is it the wider organization? And how do you sort of navigate that?
So from my experience, the relationship is with the tech team, be that the IT manager, the CIO, whoever it is that you are engaging with, to be a service provider and then start going to the CIO's boss about things. That's dangerous. That's where dragons lie. Because you're starting to be seen to, or you could potentially be seen to be undermining the CIO. I think good old school minuting of everything that you talk to the CIO about, if it's not a partnership, saying, here's our recommendations that we've put forward. You may be able to have that conversation with the COO or the CEO over a beer when you happen to bump into them, or on the golf course where you just happen to bump into them because your sales guy knows which golf clubs that CEO frequents. But I think to be seen to be doing it formally is very dangerous ground, unless it was the CEO or COO that got you in the first place. If they got you in there, then having those conversations is completely fair, because that relationship is already established. But if it isn't already established, then that's dangerous. And I like working with service providers when I'm in a contract operations manager role. But if I found out that the service provider was going above my head when there was no relationship there previously, that would sour the relationship, because how can I trust that they're working with us? That would feel like they're working against me and my team.
It's a delicate position, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
for that.
it is. But then that's why service providers are paid the big bucks, because you want to be all things to all people. You're trying to deliver what was required. You're trying to get more business. And the best way of doing it is to prove the value that you're adding, and then hopefully the door opens a bit wider. But trying to get more business by complaining about your relationship holder to their boss, that's very dangerous ground.
Just using an extreme example here.
Yep.
Cybersecurity risk is huge. Service providers are taking that more seriously now.
Mm-hmm.
If they're working, I've seen and heard of it where IT manager just doesn't get it, and they're either limiting their own beliefs, or they've got internal limitations that the service provider isn't aware of. Huge security holes. The service provider's trying to be a good partner, trying to help it, and it's just not going anywhere.
Okay, so in that kind of scenario, I wasn't necessarily thinking about that when you asked the first question. I think in that instance, if the relationship that you have with the customer organization is one where, should something go bad from a security point of view, and it's going to be your name in the press, Organization X outsource their IT to MSP Y, and security breach, blah, blah, blah. You don't want your name in the press associated with that. So I think in those scenarios, your chief exec having a quiet word with the chief exec or a board member to say, hey, look, we've highlighted this to the CIO. We're not seeing much traction, but we think it's a significant risk that we're highlighting it further up. I think that may be valid. But if it's just, we're not getting the partnership and we keep saying there's these improvements you can do and the CIO is not listening, no, don't take those above the CIO. But if it's a big enough risk where you are potentially going to be reputationally impacted because the customer hasn't listened to you, then yeah, why not? And if the CEO still doesn't want to know, well, then consider your exit strategy.
I think those are some wise words. And I think this is that what I'm picking up from this conversation is how key the relationship management part is. And we're probably, as service providers, we're used to that. We're used to having relationships that are just different. It's probably more intense, is probably over exaggerating it, but there's more touch points than the typical engagement for a lot of us. And this is where we've got to price it into our contracts. This is why there's service delivery managers as a concept. And what triggered me just even in that conversation is probably most service providers aren't actually built to engage with internal IT teams. Their whole structure and delivery mechanism and their relationship management isn't made to have conversations with CIOs, and it breaks the model.
Okay, that's interesting, because all the ones I've worked with have been different, where they're engaging at CIO level and maybe not wider. So it's a good perspective to see that.
That's probably where a lot of these break down as well. Like if you don't have that service delivery manager type role that is engaging with the CIO and providing the touch points and the reporting and that sort of internal accountability for the team, it's where even if they do want a partnership, it's going to be more difficult for them, the internal team to have that partnership as well.
Yeah. A good service delivery manager within the service provider is essential. I mean, when I'm training internal teams, I say the service desk is your most important part, because you get a good service desk, it doesn't matter how bad the rest of the IT department is. The wider organisation thinks that IT is good because the service desk is good. Adversely, if the service desk is bad but the rest of IT is awesome, people are going to think that IT is bad. And it's the same. You can have an absolutely awesome service provider, but if that service delivery manager doesn't give the customer the warm, fuzzy feelings, then you're going to go nowhere.
What are you looking for in that sort of service delivery manager, the sort of type of person?
It doesn't bother me whether they are always turn up to a meeting in a suit and tie and very 1990s professional, or whether they rock up in shorts and thongs or flip-flops or whatever terminology you're used to. As long as they can have a relationship, they understand what we're trying to do for our internal customers, and they seem to be wanting to add value. That's what I look for. But if I get somebody who every time I talk to them says, well, I don't know, I'll go back and find out, that's not my responsibility. I'll go back and talk to somebody. It's like, well, why do you even bother turning up to these meetings? Let's get somebody who can actually have a conversation. Occasionally saying, oh, I don't know, I'll have to go and talk to the head of our engineering team to find out about that. That's perfectly valid. But when it's constantly, I'm just the front to this report and I can't answer any questions, that's adding no value. So I just want somebody who can actually work with me and also tell me when I'm being unrealistic. And it can be done politely, but the whole, well, hang on a minute, James, you've been asking for this for a while, but we've also said to do that, you need to do this, and you've not even started that. So can we stop having those conversations until you've done your part? Because just like everybody else, humans forget things, and you can walk away in best intentions and then something else comes and smacks you around the back of the head and you forget. So
it's IT, right? That's what we live with.
Yeah. But I, realistically or not, expect the service providers not to walk away and forget. If I've asked them to do something, and I follow up in a couple of weeks to say, hey, has that started yet? Or I haven't seen the statement to work, or nobody sent me a blur. If it's forgotten about once, yep, that's humans. If it's forgotten about a second time, you start thinking, well, hang on, what what processes do they have in place to manage the customer relationship? Because, again, rightly or wrongly, the expectation is that you guys know what you're doing. We're struggling to survive because we've got all these things coming down from internal. We're relying on you. It may be very unrealistic, unfair, but that's what a lot of IT managers' perception is.
I think that's key, and I think what I start thinking about is probably you want someone that's a bit more technical as your service delivery manager, rather than probably a traditional account manager that a lot of service providers have, because they don't know the ins and outs of the tech side.
Yeah, they don't need to be technically competent, but they need to understand the technology that the service provider is providing. I saw a wonderful thing on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. Somebody who, I think they're in an account management role now, but they went along to client meeting, this is years ago. They'd been given all the blurb about the product that they're providing, but they knew nothing about all the supporting infrastructure. So when this CIO said, well, how does this interact with AD? He jokingly said, what, the after death? And the CIO thought, yes, very amusing, but come on, time. And they didn't know what AD was because nobody had told them about what the client infrastructure might look like. So this person knew what they'd been told, but no more. And that doesn't look good. So you don't need to be technical. A service delivery manager shouldn't be expected to say or to have a conversation with a lead techie in the customer organization and sort things out. But they should at least know these are the services we provide. This is what it means. And if somebody asks me this or says that, I can at least look knowledgeable even while I'm writing it down, thinking I don't really fully understand what they've said.
It makes sense. So sort of the other question off the back of that I have is like, what sort of reporting and transparency are you typically looking for as a CIO IT manager? What's the balance between too technical and not technical enough to empower a CIO?
That's a very difficult one to answer because it all depends on the customer. Some people want to see a load of technical information because they share the report with the wider team. Some people really don't want all that technical blurb. They just want a 3 or 4 page management summary type based report based on all the services that are provided. It's very difficult to answer that. What you will find is that a lot of customers in the first wee while of the engagement will say, I don't know what reporting I want. And they're relying on you as a service provider to provide them with something. And unless you're a new service provider, you've probably got some reports that most customers like, the majority of. Some customers will say, oh, can we also have this? Some customers will say, I don't need to see that. And then 3 months later, they'll both change and want it back in again. But I would say get a stock report or set of reports in your toolbox. And in the initial discussions, just say, hey, look, we've got these reports that we provide on a whatever regular period. Excuse me. If you need anything different, let us know. But here's something to start with. We'll tweak it over time. Because it's like when I'm doing my consulting and you say to people, do you currently have, I don't know, a process for how you do this? And they go, no. You give them a blank bit of paper or a clean whiteboard and you say, well, let's knock one up, and they just look at you scared because they don't know what good looks like. If you give them one that you've used elsewhere and say, this isn't going to be good for you, but we can tweak it, it's easier to do that. I mean, think of the ITIL 4 guiding principles. Start where you are. Give them something to start with. And know what you are comfortable providing. Don't start out with, we can do this, that, and the other in the teams in the background. You're knock and sock, and everybody are going, can we? Oh, how are we going to do that? Start with the basics. This is what our other customers tend to like. And 9 times out of 10, your customer is going to go, that's awesome. And then just maybe want a little bit of a tweak, but not much.
I like that approach, and I think there's been a lot of wisdom in this conversation. We could keep talking for ages on this subject and keep diving deeper.
Yeah, I'll need to get another cup of tea if we're going to do that.
I think people are getting sick of hearing my voice. What do you want people to take away from this conversation? And if they are just starting out to look at working with internal IT teams, or they realize they need to change, what are some next action steps they should take out of this as well?
So I think the key takeaways from my point of view is try and build that partnership relationship. Move away as much as you can from the transactional customer-supplier relationship. Get a good service delivery manager, or somebody who at least can act in that role. You may not be big enough to have a dedicated service delivery manager for all of your clients or for some of the clients. I would suggest you probably need somebody who can do it focused on your big ticket clients, because yes, you want to build all the others up so you don't have a single point of failure. So if when that CIO changes and they go, yeah, I don't want to work with you, I want to use the people I used in the last organization, you suddenly don't have to close the doors. But do you try and have a good relationship from a service delivery point of view? Because that can make or break a relationship. Help your customers. If they don't know what they're meant to be doing, help them. They're not just outsourcing technical capability to you. They're outsourcing an awful lot of trust in you to help them. If it was just technical capabilities, then the contract might just say, I need people with these skills to work with us 40 hours a week, and occasionally do on call. And that's perfectly fine if that's what you need to do to get in the door with them. But if they're outsourcing a whole load of service provision to you, then you need to step up and help them understand what other value you can add so that they can look good in their company's eyes. If they look good, they're going to keep coming back to you. If they look like idiots because of something that you have or haven't done, whether they asked for it or not in the contract, then they're not going to look fondly on you. So it's about identifying where the gaps are and helping to fill them as the negotiations are happening. Now, I know we're trying to wrap this up, but I've worked with organizations helping them to find new service providers. And it doesn't come down to cost all the time. It's about, can I work with them? And it's about, oh, yes, they've said in their RFP response that they also do these things. I never even thought about that. That would be good. You could always put it as an appendix or an addendum to say, we can also provide all this additional stuff if you want to talk about it, but here's exactly what you asked for, just so you don't get thrown out immediately by, oh, they're asking for 30, 40 grand more than the other one. But highlight all the additional stuff you can or will do, because that's really where decisions get made.
That's some sage wisdom to throw out at the end. And I think I'd add to wrap up, my biggest takeaway out of all of this is got to be geared the right way to work with internal tech teams. What you just said there, even with the RFPs, if you're not used to working with RFPs, you don't have your sort of service delivery manager function, it's a whole different way of operating than what you're used to. So you've got to make a decision as a business, and a strategic decision. Do even pursue that? Is that where we want to head? Because if you are, like what you just said, you need to do it right. Then you need to build that partnership in a different way to our normal clients that we have.
Yeah.
So it's been fantastic conversation, James. I've learnt a lot through it, and I hope the listeners take away a lot as well and get better results with their partnerships with their clients. And
Yeah,
no doubt we'll get you on in the future. So thanks very much for your time.
no, thank you for the opportunity.